Assalamu alaikum. If there is any brothers down in the basement, inshallah, if you can make your way up, that the program will be started soon, inshallah. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidil anbiya wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man ihtada bihadihi ila yaumiddin. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Praise and beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for blessing us with this opportunity and for granting us His tawfiq that we can grasp and we can benefit from this gathering that we'll be having today. And we also send darood and salam on our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that we hope Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards us by us sending our darood upon him, and we hope with this darood that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam can intercede on our behalf. So alhamdulillah, we are continuing with Masjid As-Siddiq monthly family program, and this evening we'll be having a presentation which is a very interesting presentation with some important points and lessons, with the lessons from Andalusia. And this presentation will be done by a brother who is no stranger in the community, and he's a brother that have done many works in the Islamic field, involved in the Islamic community, delivering khutbahs to such an extent that he have even taken tours to different countries across the world, such as Spain, to Sin, to China, to Umrah, to Palestine, from among the few to be listed. And he was a resident of New York City that have recently moved a few years ago to New Jersey. And he was also a graduate or ex-student from Al-Maghrib Institute, and also from one of the students from our local sheikh in the Caribbean community, Sheikh Rafiq. And this brother will be enlightening us and will be giving us some lessons, which inshallah as Muslim, there is so much to benefit from it, because as much as we know from the seerah, as we recently did from the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from Mecca and Medina, those were the lifetime of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But we are 1400 years after Hijrah, and there's so many histories of Islam that have passed. There's so many different countries and places of the history of Islam, and the Muslims have ruled and the Muslims have conquered, that has so many traits of Islam in it. So inshallah, without further ado, I would like to invite our brother Nadim Ramjan, who will be delivering the lessons from Andalusia, inshallah. Jazakumullah.
I'll start this inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربي زدني علما اللهم مصرف قلوب صرف قلبي على دينك. My dear brothers and sisters, alhamdulillah, I'm very glad to be here at Masjid Siddiq again, and I know it's a process for us to get our brothers and sisters back in the masjid after being stuck at home for 2 years. So inshallah ta'ala, as long as we are consistent in offering programs, inshallah this community will come back again out of the slumber we've been in for the past almost 2 years. The topic that we'll be discussing today is the lessons from Andalusia. And I'll start off with a disclaimer that I'm not doing any justice to the 800 years of history of Islam we have in Spain. This is just scratching the surface. And so we'll take this journey together, inshallah, and we'll draw some lessons. To start off with, we have to look at how old is America by comparison. So America was born in 1776, and so America is 245 years old. But by comparison, Muslims were in Spain, and we had a Khalifa in Spain for approximately 780 years. So a little bit of a difference there when we talk about the amount of time that was allowed for the culture to develop, Islam to develop, science to develop, a little bit of a difference by comparison. So that's just to get us started. And that's something which is proof of the fact that there's so much to study and learn there. And there's so much that we perhaps might be missing in our education in the West, that we study European history, we study history of America, but this topic requires some dedication from us as well, so we can appreciate our role in the world. A high-level timeline. Spain was conquered by Muslims in the year 711, very easy to remember, right? Just like the store. And then very soon after, a man by the name of Abdurrahman I, who was an Umayyad prince, he became the leader of the Khalifa, and there was a period of progress. And then there was a period of decline, which is called the Ta'ifa period, which is where the different cities in Spain became little fiefdoms, little Khalifas upon themselves, which is a bad thing. Then there was this revival which came at the hands of the Morabitun, who are these North Africans from Morocco, who brought the Muslims back together. Then there was a second Ta'ifa period where they broke up again. And then there was another revival group called the Muwahidun, who tried again to bring it together. But by then, it was very, very difficult. And eventually, in 1492, everything crumbles. Now, if you went to school in America, you know the year 1492, because like me, you were singing that song in second grade, third grade, that in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue to find this land for me and you, right? We all sang that song. It's still stuck in our head. But that year for us represents the fall, the final fall of Islamic Spain. And it's no coincidence, as we'll come to understand. So the point here is to take lessons. We are not going through the history of Spain. We're just extracting out some lessons, inshallah. So the first lesson is to take advantage of your youth. What is the backstory for Muslims getting into Spain? How did we wind up there? Was it an invasion? It was not an invasion, it was an invitation. There was a man by the name of Count Julian, whose daughter was basically kidnapped by this king, King Roderick. And he was the head of the Visigoth kingdom, and no one liked him. A brutal man. He stole this man's daughter. And Count Julian was by himself. He had no way to retrieve his daughter, but he had heard of these young, brave Muslims in North Africa who were led by a man named Tariq ibn Ziyad. And Tariq ibn Ziyad at this time is about 17, 18 years old. I want to start off with this. It's really important. Tariq ibn Ziyad was 17 years old and he was leading the army. And this speaks to our expectations of our youth nowadays, that we have to really start treating them as adults very, very early on, because the standard has now dropped completely. And instead of kids thinking about what impact they can have in the world, they're spending their time 3 hours building a 30-second TikTok video. This is the sadness of the youth nowadays. So we need to reinvigorate them that look at what our history was. Tariq ibn Ziyad leading this battle. And so this area today, this is not my picture. Most of the pictures are mine, but this is not my photo. This is Gibraltar, which is a separate country off of Spain. And Gibraltar is basically from Jabal Tariq, which is the mountain you see over here. This mountain is named after Tariq ibn Ziyad. And if you go on Google Maps, you can zoom in over there, and there's a masjid in his name, which was built by the Saudis to honor him, that he landed on this rock and then led the army in. And we won't go into too much detail there, but he was heavily outnumbered. Consider a football stadium versus a tennis court. And he was heavily outnumbered, more than 2-1, but it was no problem for him because the Muslims were brave, they were strong, they grew up in the desert, they had taqwa Allah, and they went in and basically were able to take over the whole Iberian Peninsula over a very short period of time. So it was conquered very quickly. And after this conquest, later Europeans, they said that we wish the Muslims had conquered even more. And the Muslims were pushing up to France, almost getting to Paris until they were pushed back. But later on they said, we wish the Muslims had come as far as Paris. Why would non-Muslim Europeans say this? We're going to answer that question shortly, inshallah. But the key thing to remember here in this section is it was led by a young man rather. And in the east, it was another young man, around 17 years old. His name is fleeting my mind, but he led the Muslim army into modern-day Punjab, Pakistan. So within 150 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, we've already expanded the Islamic empire to the far east and the far west at the hand of two 17-year-olds. A huge lesson for us in how we, especially as men, we raise our boys. The second lesson is that of pluralism, which is basically a fancy word for saying accepting of other people's cultures and religions. We have an amazing legacy there. And this is important because we're being fed Islamophobia. We're being fed, fear around Muslims. We're being fed hatred. And this is not our legacy. So I thought this was a really cute picture. So Muslims and Jews, are we born enemies? What is actually the history of Muslims and Jews? And we can see that in no better a place than, for example, when Umar radiallahu anh, when he conquers Jerusalem and he's in the Holy Sepulchre, which alhamdulillah I was able to visit that church, and the time comes for salah, and the priest tells him, well, why don't you just pray your salah here? And he says, no, if I do that, it's going to become a masjid. So he steps outside the mosque, and I stood at that same spot, and he took a pebble and he threw it. And he said, wherever that lands, I'm going to pray. He prayed there, and exactly like he said, wherever I pray, they're going to build a masjid. And that's what we have right here, the Masjid of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh. But what I really wanted to highlight is when he conquered Jerusalem with the Muslim army, he wrote a letter. And in that letter, which you probably all know, he said very clearly that when you come in here, do not break the crosses of the Christians. Do not break their crosses. I mean, you know how many ayat we have about, they say that Allah has taken a son. We're very strong in our belief, but in our treatment of people, very accepting. And so Umar set the law from the very beginning. You're not coming in here to enforce your tawheed on these people. You can debate with them, but we're not here to walk around and just break their idols and break their crosses. So in Spain, we see a similar story of acceptance. Jews were hated in Europe at this time. Hated. They're running, trying to find a place where they can live comfortably. And it's only finally under the Muslim reign in Spain that the Jews are able to live comfortably. And this is one of the things that were different with this Visigoth kingdom and the Muslim empire, that people had so much more religious freedom. So the Jews were able to settle down and have a greater level of autonomy, really. And so among the scholars that came out of this period of time was Rabbi Maimonides. And you might know Maimonides Hospital in Brooklyn. It's the same dude, same guy. He actually grew up studying at the madrasas alongside the Muslims. So much so that if someone needed a fatwa, like, can I eat at McDonald's? Can I get this house on mortgage? Whatever fatwa they needed, they could go to him. And he was recognized because he had studied our fiqh, studied our usul, studied our methodology. And he took that knowledge and improved the way Jews taught their aqidah, so that today the foundations of Jewish faith come directly from him, which was a product of him living around the Muslims. And so the first synagogue in Europe was in Muslim Spain. And I was able to visit this synagogue. Beautiful. It actually looks like Islamic architecture. You can see how it's so similar. That's where the first synagogue is. The Muslims were safe there. The Jews were safe there alongside the Muslims, and they developed their culture. Don't have time for this, so we'll come back to that inshallah if we have time. Lesson 3, our legacy of knowledge and innovation. And this is going to be a big chunk of the discussion here today. First off, this is the way we're usually taught history. You're taught European history, and anything that's non-Western doesn't exist. So you never study about the Chinese and how they traveled in 1421 and how they circumnavigated the globe before Magellan. It's just Western history and that's it. So this is slowly changing, alhamdulillah, as people become more open. But this is the way I was raised, that it's just Euro history and that's it. You go to high school, there's AP Euro and that's it. There's no AP African history, none of that. It's just European history. So we need to make sure we understand our contribution. And so to understand that contribution, we have to visit the city of Toledo. This is a photo I took on a hill just outside the city. So Toledo is a city that is basically frozen in time. It looks just like it did back then. These are the pictures I took, from a few years ago. It looks just like it did back then. The reason why is because this is one of the first cities that fell. So it was reconquered by the Christians, and then they kept moving south. They didn't have to pillage it and go further. They had bigger things to gain, especially the palaces in the south with all the riches and the gold. So Toledo was one of the first cities to fall. But Toledo is a city we should all know as Muslims and take deep, deep pride in. And it's an offense to knowledge in general that this city is not taught in high schools, in colleges, for the role it plays in the life we live today. What is that role? We have these amazing philosophers and contributors to science from BC. Aristotle, Plato, Ptolemy, Euclid, Archimedes, Hippocrates, very, very wise men in their knowledge. That knowledge that they had was being totally ignored during the Dark Ages in Europe. Not even being looked at. No one cares about books. There's complete Dark Ages. They're debating, does a woman have a soul? That's what the Dark Ages was in Europe. But while the Dark Ages is happening, we have the first golden age in our Islamic history in Baghdad, where they're taking these books from these classic philosophers and scientists, and they're converting them from Greek into Arabic at what was called the Bayt al-Hakim in the early 700s. And again, another sad thing we don't know, but do you know that Baghdad, at one point in human history, was the most populated city on the planet? It was a metropolis. Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, everyone living together side by side. And the reason for that, I have to come back though to MLK. The reason for that is, he said in one of his books that when you have a strong foundation, you have no problem integrating. And that was his way of combating the criticism he was getting from the Black Panthers, who said, why are you working with the white people? He said, if you have a foundation, you can talk to anyone. If you don't have a foundation, you have to hide in the corner and make your little cult. But if you have strong beliefs, you can talk to anyone. So if you understand your Islam, if you know your Aqidah, then you have no problem mixing with people. So in Baghdad, metropolis, the knowledge of these folks was taken and enhanced and developed by the Muslims. Then Spain comes out. Spain grows at the same time. And so this knowledge now gets moved to Spain, which becomes the new center of knowledge and ilm, and the new space for the growth of Islamic knowledge. So this Arabic text now come over to Spain, and it stays there. And after we lose Spain, the Europeans come in and they start to see the books and they say, wait, what did you guys do for the past 800 years? You took this knowledge, you make these advanced water mills, you're making these advanced pumping systems, amazing architecture. You took the medicine that these guys started with, took it to the next level. All this knowledge was developed for 800 years, enriched. Their books with the Arabic notes on the side, enhanced. So there was this massive translation that happened in Toledo, where the Arabic was then translated to Latin. And then you have this Renaissance that we go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and we see all this beautiful work that was done. The Renaissance, the point of this is very important. The Renaissance in Europe, which leads to modern day that we have today, does not happen without the preservation of this knowledge by the Muslims. There's no iPhone, there's no technology, there's no advancement in society unless the Muslims take this knowledge and develop it over 800 years. The other key point here is sometimes people, they want to claim that they're the first, right? Which is a very childish attitude. The fact of the matter is the knowledge was there, it was developed and enhanced by the Muslims, and put it another way, we are contributors to the modern day society. We are contributors to all these fields of sciences. We don't have to come and say, well, we were the first to do this and we were the first to do that. You step back from that rhetoric and just say, you know what? We played our role in the modern society you see today, and we deserve credit. So this is the key thing you have to understand about Toledo, this translation movement that happened twice, this knowledge which would have been lost if it wasn't for the people in Baghdad and it wasn't for the people in Spain. Let's zoom in on another city, Cordoba, which we'll come to in a few minutes, pronounced Cordoba in English. The Europeans refer to it as the gem of the world for its beauty, for its knowledge, sciences. Cordoba had over 600 libraries. While the rest of Europe is illiterate, amazing level of literacy in Muslim Spain. When people wanted to study anything, astronomy, math, physics, they came to Spain. If you wanted to go to med school in Europe during that time, you came to Spain. Amazingly advanced, cataracts, all this types of stuff they're doing. And there's a story of this princess in England who she was unable to have a child. And the Muslims in Spain had figured out how to perform surgery to help a woman from not having a miscarriage. And she said, if only I could go there with those Muslim doctors, I could be healed and I could have a child. But of course, out of pride, they never allowed that to happen. So the knowledge that was there was precious, absolutely precious. We'll go through some of the inventions, obviously not all of them for the sake of time. But among one of the interesting characters is this man by the name of Abbas Ibn Fernas, who died in 887. This is a video which I don't think I can play, but this is a minaret of the Cordoba Mosque that he decided one day to climb to the top of and to put on wings and to jump off to try to attempt flight. And so he's considered one of the first men to attempt flight, even before who are the people that usually attributed with flight? The Wright brothers. Way before the Wright brothers. 887, you got Ibn Fernas. And the Spanish people recognized that, so they built this bridge in his honor, which basically, oh, the video is going, that's okay, which basically looks like wings. And that's a picture of him in his honor for the attempted flight that he had. And that's just one of many things he did. And I'll read it really quickly. He designed a water clock. He derived means of manufacturing glass from sand so they could produce their own quartz, so they didn't have to import it from Egypt. The Muslims developed so much technology to make all these goods. And that's why they became wealthy, because they were selling this stuff left and right in Europe. That's how they became wealthy and built all these amazing, amazing palaces. Another thing here, he made an artificial weather simulation room in which spectators saw the stars and clouds, and they were astonished by artificial thunder and lightning. You know, like nowadays we got 3D, right? You put on glasses and you see all the effects. He was doing it in the 700s. Look how creative these people were. Absolutely amazing. And so he said, that's not a picture of him, but he said, what man-made machine will ever achieve the complete perfection of even the goose's wing? So I want you to understand, these inventions are not just your typical inventions. It's coming out of a reflection on the amazing power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what's unique about the Muslim inventions, and you're going to see some more. This is what's unique, that they look at the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, well, let me try to do that. Let me try to copy that. So he tried to do this flight after reflecting upon the power of a goose's wing. This is the gentleman who is the father of modern-day surgery, Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi. He wrote a 30-volume encyclopedia, which is still studied today in med schools. A comprehensive book on medicine. And these are some of the tools that he invented, which are still, which inspired modern day tools today. So again, amazing contributions that cannot go unrecognized. The astrolabe, something that existed BC. So we don't come and say Muslims invented the astrolabe. We don't have that kind of rhetoric. We took the knowledge that was there, we enhanced it. So the Muslims took the astrolabe, which existed BC, and they enhanced it. So you tell me, someone here, what is the Islamic connection between having this device? What's the importance in Islam to have a device like this? First of all, what does it do? It tells you your latitude, longitude. This is your GPS in the 800s, 900s. What's the value of that as a Muslim? The Qibla, absolutely. What else? One more big thing. Imagine you want to go for Hajj in the 900s. You just start walking randomly, you're going to wind up in Russia. You got to know where you're going. This is their device. That's their GPS. They pull it out, they check the stars, they have a book. They wrote down the latitude and longitude for all the major checkpoints along the way, and they make sure they're moving along that path, doing the mathematics and the trig to figure it out. This is the key device for survival if you want to do Hajj, because it's going to be a 3-4 month journey. You can wind up anywhere if you go in the wrong direction. So this is critical to the Muslims, and they developed it and they used it. The water mill enhancements. They took that technology, they enhanced it. Why is water important to us as Muslims? keep us alive. But wudu, ghusl. Do you want to keep taking that bucket and walking all the way down to the river and taking the water and then bring it to your wife? Or do you not want the water to flow directly to your house? So they developed the water mills, pump water through the city, bring it right to their house. In Grenada, they have water coming into their bathrooms in the thousands, 1100s. Europeans are like, whoa, we don't even like clean ourselves. You guys got waters coming into your house, just flowing. Whoa, that's pretty interesting. I like that, huh? Did it sleep? Okay. So they made so many enhancements to water because, again, they're living their deen. Like, how can I make my deen easier? Let me invent something to make it easier, right? Then you have another character, Ibn Zaryab, and this is not a fatwa music. He had a number of very interesting inventions. So he took the lute and he added a string to it, which meant you had to redevelop all the chords. So there's a big contribution there to music. Fashion. He introduced the idea of fashion and dressing with style. And he introduced hair salons in Spain. People started having hairstyles and looking cool. He introduced the idea of a 3-course meal. He introduced the idea of toothpaste and so many more inventions, just like normal stuff that you see Muslims contributing to that quite often, oftentimes we don't hear enough about. And then just the innovation that they had. So this is a picture from Seville, Spain. And there's this major river that the Christians from the north would use to come and attack the Muslims. So if you have ships coming and attacking you and you're living in, the thousands or 1100s, how are you going to stop the ships from coming? Has to do with the tower. What do you think? The light's not going to stop the ship. Signal's not. Wait, how are you going to stop that ship from coming? It's a big, massive ship coming with an army. So what they did, this is the Guadalquivir River. On the other side of the river is another tower, which was destroyed in an earthquake. But what they did was they had a ridiculously heavy chain that they put on this tower here, and it connected to the other tower there, and that chain would physically stop the ships from coming in. I don't know how many pounds that chain was, man, but it was enough to stop a ship. So again, just an example of the ingenuity that these Muslims had. And then the Islamic architecture, of course, all this amazing beauty. But again, it's not just architecture for the sake of architecture, it's Islamic architecture. What makes it Islamic? Because it came from, I have my deen, I have my limitations of what I can do. And this one here, there was a museum in Cordoba, which was used to be a Muslim family's home from back in the day. So I went into there and I was walking through and I got to the bedroom. And then when I got to the bedroom, I noticed this door. And the door led to a garden. And then on the side, there was this 8-foot concrete wall you can see, which led to another garden. This is the Muslim woman's private garden, where she can go and take off her hijab. You see? 8-foot wall. She goes. She has this amazing, beautiful garden. She could just let her hair flow in the wind, and just enjoy it. That's the Islamic architecture. Similarly, when you walk through the streets of Spain, you'll notice all the houses look boring in the front. They all look the same. But it's only when you peek in and look, then you'll see these courtyards that are beautifully decorated. Why is this Islamic? Because if you make a lot of money, Allah blesses you with a lot of wealth, but your neighbor is just barely making the mortgage, and then you go put up a big fancy fountain in the front, how's he going to feel? You'll be like, man, you're going to feel depressed. So what do the Muslims do? They keep the front of the house the same, and they spend their wealth on the inside where no one can see it. So they don't make their neighbor feel bad. That's the akhlaq that the Muslim has, right? So it's embedded in the architecture, and you see this over and over and over. And again, because the house is square-shaped, your wife can go there, take off her hijab, and just enjoy it, right? So instead of doing things for show, you do things that are practical, and you make sure you're not hurting people's feelings at the same time. Here's another example of another garden. Again, inside the house. So the architecture itself, of course, is just absolutely mesmerizing when you're there. And if you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, they have a section for Andalusia. You can actually see some of these things that they've actually brought over. But it was something that was just completely mesmerizing to the Europeans. They couldn't even begin to fathom the amount of detail that went into this and the amount of skill that went into this. Just absolutely mesmerizing the artwork in these buildings. And again, it combined with the water. You see the water flowing right into the building over here and continuing, because they had water flowing into every room in their house. And over here, you have this fountain pushing out water. There's no electricity here. This is all natural pumps they've created to push this water into this fountain over here. You can try. You might get arrested. Again, more examples. Just amazing, amazing beauty in terms of the architecture and the calligraphy that is there. It takes lots of tourists. There's waiting lines to get into these places, even at night. Absolutely beautiful. The water flowing. This is right outside of the Cordoba Mosque over here. So all this beautiful gardens and artwork. What is the source of inspiration for all this beauty? Again, it's not just architecture for the sake of architecture. What's the inspiration? How many times do you read in the Quran? تَجْرِي مِن تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا. Gardens under which rivers flows. So this became an obsession for these people that they want to try to imagine, what does Jannah look like? Let me build something that makes me think about Jannah. And so they built these amazing gardens, and again, there's water flowing left and right. Then we come to this, which is the gem of kind of all of Spain. And this is Masjid Cortoba. And it's perfectly designed. I'm not an architect or a construction guy, so I can't really appreciate this. But when architects come here, they basically just become flabbergasted at what they see. Only they can appreciate the complexity of what we see here. So all the columns have the exact same height, and the arches are at the same exact level, so that it basically looks like infinity. And so they say this is to remind people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that He's infinite in all of His names and attributes. His hearing is not like our hearing, right? It's infinite. So it's supposed to help you ponder the divine when you go to this masjid over here, which has about 1,013 columns. And in its peak, every single column, there's a halaqah going on. Because remember, they're overflowing with knowledge over here. There's so much money, so they can invest money in scholarship, invest money in schools, learning. Go ahead.
How do they make the money?
Who?
Them.
From all the stuff they make, from the gold they make, the clothing they make, from the medicine, all these services that they're selling. We'll come to a list in a second. I'll show you. So this masjid here is Masjid Cortoba. It has this distinct double arch design with the red and white. And this is what inspired the masjid that we see in Damascus, which inshallah one day we can go visit that place, and Masjid Nabawi. So when you go to Masjid Nabawi and you see these alternating colors on the arches, which I'm sure you've all seen, it's inspired from this. This is in Cordoba or Cordoba in Spain, right? And the double arch design, the reason for that was the architect wanted to have the arches all at the same level, because the building has multiple levels, so basically, and multiple ceiling heights. So to make up for the differences in the ceiling heights, they use this double arch design. So the difference in the height is made up for over here, which you don't really see, so that these arches are all at the same height throughout. And when you stand at one column, it's perfectly aligned with all the columns. And then you turn this way, perfectly aligned with all the columns. It's just perfectly made. Amazing, amazing building. The history of this masjid is also important to note. So it was built by Abdurrahman I, and in BC, right? BC time, it was before Common Era, actually, I should say, right? BCE. It was a Roman temple, and then Christians came and built a church on top of it. So when Abdurrahman I and the Muslims, they came here, they saw this location, and they said, can we use part of your church to build a masjid? And how much can we pay you? So they paid them, and they used part of it. Then the Muslim community grew, and they said, listen, we need a little bit more. So can we take half of your church and use it as a masjid? So they paid them more, and they took half. Eventually, more and more. And then they said, listen, we need this whole space for a masjid. It's a great location. We love it. We're going to pay you double, triple what the masjid is, what your church is worth, so you can build it elsewhere. So again, you see here a whole different adab. It's not, we have the power, so we're going to take it from you, and we're going to just, with force. It's this negotiation when they didn't even need to do it. So that's why, alhamdulillah, this masjid is still standing today. While it is a church, it's still standing today that we can go and visit it. This is a castle that was built in Seville. After the Muslim caliphate fell, the Europeans came in, and then they saw all this amazing architecture, and they said, well, can you build us one of those? So Peter the First, he hired Muslims, specifically the Muwahidun that we mentioned in the beginning. He hired the Muwahidun to build this castle, and it is the oldest inhabited castle in all of Europe. But let's go back a second to something a little bit controversial. What do you guys see over here?
You see on top of in the middle.
In the blue. It's crosses. And what else?
We see them in this picture like it looks like a
This is like Arabic letter is
Keep looking.
okay.
You can find a sample somewhere.
You see my
Let's see.
all around it. It says words and letters.
But there's one word that stands out that you should the word Allah.
What is it?
So this is
It seems to me like it's say Allah here.
Yeah, right
but
here.
They have a cross. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is what I'm
so what happened was they hired these Muslim architects and they said, we want you to build something that's for us, the Christians, but mix in that Arabic calligraphy stuff because we really like it. So that's what you get
Wait, so the castle's for Muslims or
for Christians. But it was designed by Muslims and they love our poetry. They love our Arabic script. They said, listen, just do something, man. That's what they got. So of course, if you don't agree with that from a fiqh point of view or Aqidah point of view,
It says a cross on Allah's name.
I know it's bad, but that's what happened. Okay. And then you can see here again at their request, all this Arabic carved into wood over here, Qadr Allah. Over here, there's poetry mixed in. This is a Christian castle built by the Muslims, and it's featured in a number of TV shows. I'm not going to mention their names because they're not good, but really beautiful castle, and it's still standing there today. So to summarize, what are the sciences that were developed in Muslim Spain? Everything in yellow here. I'm not going to read them all. These are the contributions we've made in all these different subject areas. And some of the names that stand out, Ibn Hazm in his fiqh, Ibn Arabi in his philosophy, Ibn Rushd in his fiqh, Imam Qurtubi in his tafsir. So we're developing all of these secular sciences, which it's not secular because all knowledge is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right or wrong. There's no such thing as religious knowledge and secular knowledge. It's just ilm. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. Allah taught Adam the names of all things. All knowledge is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, many of these things are inspired by our needs as Muslims. I want water in my house. I don't want to walk to the lake at 4 a.m. to pray Fajr or walk to the river. I want it there, right? So anyway, these are just some of the major, contributors. If you ever want a headache, like you really desire to have a headache, you can read Ibn Rushd's book where he did comparative fiqh, and he has like 20, 30 pages on like witr, for example, explaining all the differences of opinions. I think it's a 4-volume set. It's a comparative fiqh book, and there's nothing like it. Imam Qurtubi, of course, his tafsir, amazing. Ibn Arabi, a little bit controversial. And Ibn Hazm writing his books on love, which are used in classes of, talking about Islamic romance. Lesson 4, the importance of pure intentions. So any hadith book you open, it always starts with this hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ. Actions are based on intentions. And we see a lesson here. So Abdurrahman I, when he came to, quickly his story. So at the time when Spain was conquered in 711, there was that transition happening between the Umayyad dynasty and the Abbasid dynasty, right? We had dynasties in Islam. That's the history, right? We don't like that. We'd rather it be on the purity of the 4 Khalifa, but we had the 4 Khalifa, and then after that, things just kind of went haywire. So when the Abbasids now were taking over the Islamic State, in Hijaz and so forth, they were looking to hunt down anyone that had Umayyi blood, because that's what you do. If you guys have watched Ertugrul, that's what you do. You hunt down all the people that have the blood from that previous dynasty, and you kill them so no one can contend for the power of the state. So this man, Abdurrahman I, was the last prince in the Umayyad dynasty. So he was fleeing. He was fleeing through Syria, trying to run and make sure no one's finding him. They got bounty on his head. And eventually he makes it to Spain because he hears that Muslims just conquered. And so when they find out about his past, he becomes the Khalifa. So the Umayyad dynasty continues in, of all places, Spain. From all the way from the Middle East, all the way to Spain, that's where it continues. So when he comes in, he's pure of heart. He had to go through struggle. So his first priority is, I want to make a masjid that puts a message out there about the Muslims. It has to be audacious. It has to be huge. To walk around this masjid will take you half an hour. It's about 1,500 feet by 1,500 feet. It is gigantic. It was audacious how big it was. The only thing that rivaled it in the world at that time was the Hagia Sophia in Turkey. It was on that level, right? So he built this masjid. I mean, and from that pure intention, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, of course, the pure intention, but we judge the actions. The masjid is still standing here today. And I spoke about how it was established. So this is just one side of the masjid. It's long. It is very, very long.
Do you know how much miles?
I don't know how many miles, but you can Google it. So the construction started in about 784, right? And again, this is the inside of the masjid. Really complex design, these complex arches to support the heavy weight of the dome, or arches upon arches. Absolutely amazing, amazing masjid. Again, some more views of the masjid from the outside, beautiful design as well. But then the successor of his successor, Abdurrahman III, different personality. He comes in and says, I want to build a city unlike anyone has ever seen before, that people are going to realize, how powerful we are as Muslims and how amazing we are. So different intention. Abdurrahman I wanted to build a masjid. This guy wants to build an amazing city. Think of Beverly Hills. Think of the Hamptons. That's what he wants to do. So he nearly bankrupts the Islamic State building this city called Medinat Az-Zahra. And he invests his time and energy in working to build this facade of being amazing and cool. So he did really silly things, like lily pads. He had lily pads in these ponds. And what he would do is, the lily pads opened in the morning time, I believe. So before they would open, he would put like diamonds and pearls inside them when he knew guests were coming from Europe, just so when these people came from Europe, they would say, oh my God, these Muslims, they have lily pads that generate gems. Like that's what he spent his time doing. And anytime someone would come, they would come into a room to meet him. And this room would be so ornate. And he'd make them wait there for like half an hour. And then a servant would come and say, okay, we're going to take you now to him. And then they would go to another room. And the second room, much bigger and fancier than the previous one. Like, oh yeah, this is the room that's fit for a king. We're going to see him here. Another half an hour passes. Okay, now we're going to take you. Take him to a third room, even bigger and more audacious. So what is he trying to do, right? He's trying to big up himself. So in less than 150 years, this entire city covered, destroyed, pillaged. And the design, so this is like an arena where he wanted for entertainment to happen. So the design of the masjid, the design of the city, you have the big city, and then on the outside, at the corner, outside the city, you have the masjid. So the masjid is an afterthought, because that was his mentality. I just want to build this amazing palace. And who knows what's going on inside the city? Because once you got money, you know what happens after that. Drinking, women, all kinds of stuff. And there's other things about him that I'm not going to go into because we have a young man here. But he dabbled in other things when he got bored with women. So that's the importance of intention. What you do for Allah will last forever. What you do for fame, it's gonna die with you. So now we come to the sad part of the story, which is the humiliation that came with the fall of Spain. There is no other example on planet Earth where Islam came and it was completely removed. Think about it. Islam, for us in the Guyanese Indian community, Islam came from India to Guyana. It took root and it's still there today. Islam has gone to places like Iceland and it's still there today. Islam has gone to Russia and it's still there today. Islam has gone to Indonesia. Ooh, hundreds of millions of Muslims in Indonesia. Only one piece of place on earth where Islam came and then it was completely wiped off. And that is Spain. How did that happen? Simply put, our obsession with wealth, our obsession with dunya, forgetting to care for each other. Just wealth, money. I need to get that second house. I need to get that third house. I need to upgrade from the Honda Accord to the Lexus and then the Bugatti. Obsession with wealth and complete humiliation came. So 1492, what's the connection? 1492, and I was talking to Brother Nassim. I said, why don't we title this Christopher Columbus, the First Tablighi? That was the original name for this event. Reason being, while Grenada, which is the last city that fell, it was being sieged, Columbus was sleeping in a masjid outside the city, waiting for the news that the city has fallen, Grenada, so that he can take the money from that victory to fund his trip to America. 1492 is a day of celebration for Americans. It's a day of sadness for us. And so they have this right in Grenada, Columbus, going over to Queen Isabel and getting basically the edict that now he can take this money and fund his trip. And he's using maps that were built by Muslims. He's using technology of ships that was built by Muslims. And he's taking Muslims with him on the boat because he doesn't know what the heck he's doing. So what happens now from 1492? 1492, Muslim rule officially comes to an end. Done. No more caliphas anywhere in Muslim Spain. Every single city has been successfully conquered. From 1492 to 1501, the Christians come in, Isabel comes in, and she's like, listen guys, if you leave Islam and become Christian, we're going to give you gold, we're going to give you horses, we're going to take really good care of you. And so some Muslims are like, yeah, sure. They take it and they become Christian. A few years after, or even shortly after, they saw these same people that converted, they're back in the masjid reading the Quran. So like, hey, what happened there? We tried to be nice to you guys. And then you just went back to your old religion, right? So then, in 1502, they said, okay, we tried the easy way with you guys. Now we're going to give it to you the hard way. I don't know if you're ready for this. How old are you? Okay, you're ready for this, inshallah. So in 1502, Islam is now illegal. And even though myself going to junior high school in Queens, and I had my global history teacher telling me, you Muslims, you know what you guys do when you come into a land? You tell the people, convert, pay jizya, or die. No. That's your story. That's your story. That's what they say. Convert to Catholicism, or leave, or die. That's what goes out. None of the pluralism, none of the acceptance. And the Jews, forget about it. They better run. They're going to go after them first. Then 1511, because this just goes out, but people are like, okay, we're just going to pretend to be Muslim. I'm sorry, we're going to pretend to be Catholic, but we're still going to practice our Islam. And so that's what we call the Moriscos. The Moriscos are those that are outwardly Christian, but inwardly Muslim. So they see that, okay, if we're really going to stop this thing, then we got to shut down all the halal butcher shops. So butchering animals, if anyone is found butchering an animals in the Islamic way, zabiha, that's not enough. So in 1523, if anyone is caught wearing any types of Muslim women clothing, they're done. Fridays, every house has to have their door open. Why do they do that? So they can't hide and do Jummah. So they just keep coming. They just keep coming. They just keep coming. 1526. You guys, I know you're enamored by Arabic. Too bad. Arabic is now illegal. No one's allowed to keep anything Arabic. Don't let me find a Quran anywhere near your house, even for historical purposes. Don't want to see it. No Arabic anywhere. Done. And then 1560, the interrogations start. And they hunt down the Muslims and they start to torture them until they confess that they've been pretending the whole time. And then finally in 1609, there's a cleansing that happens, an ethnic cleansing that happens to make sure there's not a single Muslim left in the Iberian Peninsula, Muslim and Spain. So the only place on earth where this happened. This is a fort in Grenada where the final battle was fought. The Muslims, they weren't going to just give up. They fought to the bitter end. So this is a fort there in Grenada. It's on top of a mountain where the final battle was fought. Over here, this is a crevice above the gate on the second floor where, like, if you're down to like your last 3 men that are defending, you will pour hot tar down there to stop the people coming in. That's like your last thing you do. You just pour tar on them as they're coming in to get you so you can just kill the last few that you can. Then the interrogations happen. So it's documented. This was a picture I took in one of the museums in Cordoba of the dialogue between a woman being tortured and the men torturing her. It's in classical Spanish. My sister, who's bilingual, tried to translate it for me, but she couldn't. But they translated part of it. It's right there. So she exclaimed, meaning she screamed, "Release me, gentlemen, and tell me what I have to say. I do not know what I did. Oh Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. They gave me one more turn to the rope, because that's what they did. They tied the wrist and then they keep tightening, tightening. They gave me one more turn to the rope. And she said, please loosen it up a little bit so I can remember what I have to say. I do not know what I did. I did not eat pork because I found it disgusting. I did everything, release me, and I will tell you the truth. Why didn't she eat pork? Because she was Muslim. And maybe she wasn't even Muslim anymore, but the tradition of not eating pork had been passed down. Maybe she was a full-fledged Christian, but as soon as they saw you're not eating the pork, closet Muslim. What about the Cordoba Mosque? This is a aerial view. So you can see how big the masjid is. Huge. And there's the minaret that Ibn Fernas jumped off of. This is the courtyard where you make wudu and you hang out. Beautiful masjid. They subplanted a cathedral on top of the masjid, removing several hundred columns. This was done under the reign of Carlos III. And these priests who had seen this beautiful masjid, they said, listen, we got to do what you normally do in conquest. You got to tear down the masjid and build a church instead. And at first, Carlos III was like, no, you can't do that. Look at this thing. It's beautiful. They kept insisting, kept insisting, kept insisting. Eventually, he gave up. He said, okay, build your cathedral. So they built their cathedral, and then they went to him, and they were very proud of what they had built. Very proud of their ugly cathedral that they had built. It is ugly to our eyes because we don't believe in imagery. It's their belief. It's up to them what they want to do. But to us, it's disgusting. That's not how we worship God. So they came to him with so much pride. And then he said these famous words. He said, what you've built here, we can find throughout Europe. But what you destroyed can never be replaced. His own words. Because they knew the beauty of this masjid that I showed you in the previous pictures, how amazing it was. Its architecture. And they literally cut out a section and just planted it. But the funny thing is, it's called La Mosque Cathedral. It's called the Mosque Cathedral. That's what it's called. That's what the Christians call it. You ask them, where are you going on Sunday? I'm going to the Mosque Cathedral. La Mosque Cathedral. Because it's still a mosque. You can't deny it. So it's interesting. It's painful to go there. If you try to pray, you will be arrested. The last person to pray there was Allama Iqbal, who is the famous Pakistani poet. Also, Saddam Hussein, because he was so powerful, he's like, I'm going to call Azan and pray. I don't care what you guys say. What you going to do? He's Saddam. So Saddam prayed there as well, but there's no prayer allowed here. There's no prayer allowed. Here's another cathedral in Seville. So after I went to Cordoba, that was the first city we went to, because historically it came first, chronologically. So then I came here. I saw this cathedral. I said, I wonder if that's a masjid. So I looked at this. I'm like, that looks like a mihrab. So I pull out my phone, turn on the GPS, and guess what? It's facing Makkah. It's a masjid. It's a masjid. And look at this thing over here. Oh, it got cut off. Did it get cut off? Yeah, it got cut off. So this is amazingly tall. It's called La Giralda. It's an amazing minaret. And now it's been, changed. So they added their bells and they added that stuff. But this thing is gigantic. I would have to say probably 50 feet by 50 feet square and at least 8 stories. So imagine you're the muadhin and you got to call azan. How are you going to do it? Have really good cabs? Have really good quads? There's no elevators back then. How are you going to do this 5 times a day? Come on, man. You're in charge of the Muslim Ummah. How are you going to make it easy? You built your pretty minaret. Now how are you going to call azan? A climbing wall? You're going to climb that wall every day, man? That's too much work. Rope? You're going to rope yourself? You ever tried that in gym class? That's tough, man. I can never do it. I burn my hands. How are you going to do it? Huh? Nah, man, come on. Muslims are creative. Yeah.
So a person goes upstairs and then pulley?
Pulley? So how's he going to get upstairs? Huh? How's he going to get upstairs to pull him? No, man. Muslims are smart. So if you look inside, you will see a spiral ramp. And the muadhin would jump on his horse and ride his way to the top. In Grenada, they made a special fountain called Plaza De Bib Rambla. And this is the place where when they took all of our books, they brought them here and they burnt them. These people so ignorant, they celebrated burning knowledge. What did we do in Baghdad? Looked at the knowledge. Oh wow, some pretty amazing stuff. Let me enhance that. No respect for ilm. So they burnt all the books here and they built this fountain to celebrate that. Get into more of what they were doing to eradicate Islam. They had early morning raids. They would come before sunrise in the morning. People come to the door. If their face is wet, why is their face wet? Making wudu for Fajr. Your Christian dad dies, but we know he was Muslim. The priest goes and attends the burial. Make sure that you commit him to Christ and all that stuff. You got to do everything. You bury him. But that's my dad. He's Muslim. So what do? In the night, you go, you dig him up, you wash him, you shroud him, you pray the janazah, and then you bury him. They get wind of what's going on. So they go the next day, they check the grave, they don't see the body. Muslim family. Kill them all. Then comes the 3-step methodology that the Crusaders developed. They would come to the house of people who they suspected as Muslim. Open up. Where's your pork? Go take a bite right now, let me see. Number 1. Where's your wine? Bring it. Drink it, let me see. That's number 2.
Wait, how do they?
Number 3, curse Muhammad in front of me right now. Curse him. Use the worst words right now. They keep doing that. They keep doing that. They keep doing that. They keep doing that until the Islam and the Iman is just taken out of the heart. Because the kids see it. Like, yeah, Muhammad, he should be cursed. And it makes sense now when I talk to certain people and they curse Muhammad. Sorry, what was your question?
My question is, one day was.
Okay, let me know. So it ties back to what we see happening today, right? With the Uyghur Muslims. It's the same thing that's happening. Entire millions of Muslims being wiped out and no one coming to their rescue. It's still happening today, yes.
How do they know the people that knock on the doors if it's real wine? You just put whipped
I mean, they can take a sip and they'll know, right? If they wanted to, they can take a sip and they'll know. These guys are pros, right? That's their job. They're the real Haram police. So the Uyghurs, we have the same thing happening today. And then let's bring it to Modi and the BJP, right? The extremist Hindu party in India. Would you believe me? And you may not, but alhamdulillah, I have friends in Spain that live there. Would you believe me if I told you that about 8 years ago, Modi and his party sent representation to go to Muslim Spain to study how these guys pulled it off? How did you guys get rid of Islam in your land? Because we want to do the same thing. So I'm not trying to shame us, because I love you guys for the sake of Allah. But we better make sure we know our history better than these people, because they're studying it, of how it was done, so they can replicate the same thing. And so all this happens when we're divided, when we're not together, when we're obsessed with wealth, and we forget our tradition. And the blood of the Muslim is so cheap. However, there's light at the end of the tunnel. Islam will not only survive, it will always thrive. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in Surah As-Saf. And I know this has been like a heavy history thing, but now we're going to come to ayat and a hadith to close off, inshallah. Allah tells us in Surah As-Saf. And this is the ayah that was ringing in my ears as I was halfway through the trip. Because I'm like, how did millions of Muslims just disappear? But there's a revival happening in Spain. And we're going to come to that in a second. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, يُرِيدُونَ لِيُطْفِعُوا نُورَ اللَّهِ بِأَفْوَاهِهِمْ. They desire, they want to put out the light of Allah with their mouth. وَاللَّهُ مُتِمُّ نُورِهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْكَافِرُونَ. But Allah will complete His light, and He'll always complete His light, even if they despise it. So they can try to put out the light of Allah, but Islam will always thrive. So what were some things that they did to maintain their Islam? Just to give some examples. These fatwas started coming out for the Moriscos to maintain their Islam. So among them, if you don't have water, you do tayammum. But what if you can't even do tayammum because you're scared of being killed? So they said, just look at the wall and do the tayammum in your head, and that will be your purification. And then the salah, don't risk doing it in your house. While you're walking in the streets, imagine yourself going through the qiyam and the ruku and the sujood. And these are the fatwas we find in Morocco from the books that were preserved from how people were maintaining their Islam. And these fatwas are going to come back in a second. And so the Muslims would attend church on Sunday, they would do the Catholic prayers, but they would still learn the Quran and pray their salah in their home. And they would hide the Quran behind the walls of their house so that it wouldn't be found. And so one of those lights of hope that we have is this family in South Spain, indigenous Spanish Muslims, and among them this man, Mansour Abdul Salam, who was among the Muslims or let's say the Spaniards that converted to Islam in the early 70s. And there was a group, and there were some Muslims from America that went to Spain and started to do da'wah and tell people about their history and who they really are. And so a bunch of people came back to Islam, and he was among them. And this man was a very famous doctor. He traveled to China, gave lectures, very well off, mashallah. He had a house in South Spain on the water, very expensive, you would imagine. He became Muslim, realized what was really important in life, sold his house, moved to the middle of Spain, bought a house with 5 acres in the middle of nowhere, in the mountains. And in the basement, he built a masjid, and he called it Masjid Dar es Salaam. And he started to rebuild Islam. And his group of people, and this is the top of his house over here. We prayed salah on the top of his house, and it's actually at the foot of a castle. And I called the adhan there, and it was one of the most amazing experiences in my life. Because when I called the adhan, my voice was echoing off the mountains, because it's just barren. And all I could think was, we believe in Islam that everything has a cognizance, right? The member that Prophet used to pray on, when they moved it was crying. So this land, imagine how much it misses hearing the takbirat and the tasbih. We have that connection with the land, don't forget that. So he built that house, he built that masjid in his home, and then he formed the Muslim community. And he took his money, he sent one son to Yemen to learn Arabic. He sent another to Egypt to learn Arabic. He married his daughter to a sheikh from Northern Africa. He made that investment that his kids are going to be full-time da'is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so in 1967, him and his group, they finally petitioned with the government so that Muslims are allowed to organize for religious purposes. Imagine that, Islam in this land for 800 years, and they have to go and rebuild from scratch. Here's an example in Grenada of these villages in the mountains, and it's beautiful, these white villages in the mountains. And I went to one of these villages, it was called Pampanera. And in the middle of the village is a church. Who builds their house of worship in the middle? Muslims. That's the Islamic design. It used to be a masjid, then it's a church. What's important about this is that when the Crusaders came in, these Muslims, they fled into the mountains and formed these villages. So every time you see these white villages in the mountains, those people are all descendants of Muslims. All descendants. So I was at the end of my trip, I decided to be a little bit of a troublemaker. So I went to one of the shops and I looked and I saw an old lady. I was like, all right, perfect. Now I'm going to use my high school Spanish. So I went to her and I said, was your great-grandparents or your great-grandmother, was she Muslim? And she was about to answer me, and a young Christian woman started yelling at me. And she's saying, what are you talking about? We were saved by those Moors. They came in and they forced us to become Muslim. And thank God we were saved by them. And she just started giving it to me for like 4 or 5 minutes. So finally she left. So then I turned to the old lady again, and I was like, what's your answer? And she said, yeah, probably. Because why else are you living in the mountains? If you were really being abused by the Muslims and they were keeping you captive, when the Crusaders came, you should be like, yeah, mashallah, you're here, thank you. You wouldn't have ran into the mountains. So you have these mountain villages. And in these mountain villages, you find very peculiar Christians. Before that, sorry, a little bit, let me come back to that, that's not important. So people are, in those villages, they are, doing renovations on their homes. and then they're finding Qur'ans hidden behind the walls. There's a story of a grandmother recently, like, in the past couple of decades, there was a grandmother, and this story is coming to me from a brother who's Muslim, who lives in Grenada, who does full-time Islamic tours. There was this grandmother who called her grandson near to her, and she said to him, as she was on her deathbed, she says, I want to tell you something. It's the only thing I have remaining from my foreparents. And don't tell it to anyone. Don't tell it to anyone. Because that's one thing I forgot to tell you. When this Muslims are being attacked like this, a father wouldn't tell his son he's Muslim, and a son wouldn't tell his father he's Muslim. Just for fear that if I'm tortured, I might admit it. So you were basically Muslim by yourself during that time. So when she's on her deathbed, she goes to her grandson. She says, listen, I only have one thing from my ancestors, and just please pass it on to your kids and keep it with you. And it's Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Rasulullah. That's all she had. But they kept it. Even in the 21st century, they kept it. And so that person studies Islam, and then alhamdulillah, they become Muslim. Then you also find a collection of Christians in these towns where they wake up before the sun has risen, they wash their face, and they go for a walk. They're Christian. They wake up before the sun rises, they wash their face, and they go for a walk. Why is that? Right. Because their great-grandparents probably went for Fajr, but they couldn't tell them what they were doing. All they saw was they washed their face and they leave the house to go to the masjid. So Christians doing these interesting things, and then it's being retold to them that there's a reason why you're doing that. It's because your foreparents were Muslim. You find another collection of Christians who, they only read the Bible when there's a wall behind them. What's that? Well, in Morocco, we find these fatwas, where the fatwa says that when you pray your salah with a wall behind you so that you can see someone coming so you can break your salah. And keep a Bible next to you. So you break your salah and you quickly pick up the Bible and you're like, yeah, I was just reading my Bible. What do you think I was doing? Right? But you find Christians, 100% Christians, that only read the Bible when there's a wall behind them. So then the fatwa has to be taught to them like, listen, do you know why you do that weird thing? Because your foreparents were Muslim. You have some people, they have this recipe they pass down from generation to generation. And all that's being said is that this recipe was something that they used to do on their day of celebration. What is that? Eid. So literally all they have left of Islam is a recipe. And so this Islamic empire, it grew so big and so fast in under 150 years from the death of the Prophet because of this true taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because we had people of bravery. We had people that valued the akhirah more than they value the dunya. And so how did Islam get wiped out of Spain? We've covered that. This is a classic image of the Muslims on the left as they're handing over the keys to the Christians coming in. This is the Alhambra Palace in Grenada. So to recap, the first lesson is there's no age limit on you when it comes to impacting society. Every person is important. The young, the old, everyone. We have a legacy of accepting other people's not accepting their beliefs, but accepting people into our community regardless of their beliefs. We have 800 years of history that needs to be studied and appreciated. We have to see the importance of a pure intention, Abdurrahman I versus Abdurrahman III. And we have to understand that disunity will lead to complete and utter humiliation always. And also keep in mind that Allah is the one who is in control, and Islam will always, always thrive. We end with this verse in the Quran. And as we go through the translation, we have to think, what is going to be our legacy? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ma yartadid minkum an dinikum. O you who believe, if you turn your back, if you turn away from your deen, فَسَوْفَ يَأْتِ اللَّهُ, then Allah will immediately replace you بِقَوْمٍ, with a nation, يُحِبُّهُمْ وَيُحِبُّونَهَا, a nation who Allah loves them and they love Allah. So if you turn your back on the religion, Allah is going to replace you with a people that He loves and they love Him. What are their characteristics? أَذِلَّةٍ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, they are gentle and kind with the believers. أَعِزَّةٍ عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ, and they're harsh against the enemies of Islam. Because the opposite was happening in Spain. Do you know how the final city fell? And the ones before them as well, Grenada. It fell because a father and son were fighting over a girl, and they were hiring the Christian army to overthrow them when they came into power. So the father would gain power, the son would hire the Christian army to overthrow the dad so he could get back power and take the girl. And that happened throughout Spain. They kept hiring the Christian armies, filling their pockets with money so they could eventually walk in and take back everything. So Allah says that these people, they're kind with the believers and they're harsh against the enemies of Islam. Kafir doesn't mean your neighbor. It means enemy of Islam. We're all good with that? Right? And then also these people, yujahiduna fi sabilillah, they struggle in the way of Allah. وَلَا يَخَافُونَ لَوْمَةَ لَائِمٍ, and they are not scared of criticism. We have to stand our ground as Muslims. Doesn't matter what the culture says about any topic. We have our Quran, we have our Sunnah. We are not going to waver. We have no fear of criticism. Speak in polite ways, gentle ways, and all that, but we don't bend the rules of Islam. ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ, and that is the favor of Allah upon who He wishes. وَاللَّهُ وَاسِعٌ عَلِيمٌ. So remember this ayah. If we don't do this work, Allah will replace us with those who He loves and who have true love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then lastly, last slide. This is a hadith that we often mistranslate. You've all heard the hadith that that the Muslim ummah is like a body. How does it end? When one part hurts, the other part feels it. That's a fair translation, but it's missing something critical here. So this is the actual hadith. The Prophet said, Taral mu'mineen, you will see the believers, in their rahmah, their mercy for one another, and their love for one another, and their kindness to one another, kamathali jasid, like a body. When one part of the body is hurt, this are the two keywords. And I wish one of the sheikhs were here. Bisahari wal humma. So the Prophet says that you'll see the believers, they have mercy to one another, love for one another, kindness to one another, and they function like a single body. When one part of the body is hurting, the others, they're suffering from insomnia. This is insomnia. They can't sleep. I can't sleep for the pain that the believers are feeling in Palestine and in Sin and in India and in Kashmir. I can't sleep. Wal-hum, and fever. They're just burning up inside. They can't take it. So these are the attributes of the believer. Maybe inshallah after the part we could, do I have 5 more minutes or no? Can I finish up after or just?
We got 4 minutes.
4 minutes, I'll take 4 minutes. So Masjid Siddiq has an amazing logo. This is your guys' logo, right?
Yes.
So read the words. Hold fast to the rope of Allah and be not divided among yourselves. That's what it's all about. So I'll close now in 4 minutes really quickly, some keys to a successful community. So number 1, don't be scared of conflict. We have an incident where Abu Dhar called Bilal the N-word. That's what he did. But they got over it. So don't say there's no racism in the community. We got problems, we're going to fix them, we're going to move forward inshallah. Don't be scared of conflict. The best of us, the companions, had problems with each other, but they got through them. Next, be present at the masjid for every single event. If you're part of the board, you're part of the community, you're a paid member, you come to the masjid for every single event. You're not allowed to say the words, I'm too busy. You're not allowed. You have to be present for every single program that the masjid has once you're part of the community. You have to be there. Next, it's not leadership, vision, and goals that you have to worry about. Oftentimes you get involved in masjid work. Okay, well, who's the leader? We got to pick the best leader that knows the most Quran, and and then we got to have a good vision, and then we got to set goals, and we have to measure. No, that's not the way it works. You can have the worst leader in the masjid, but if the people are committed, you'll be successful. Make sense? If we all show up and we're committed to the community, then we can have the worst leader. It doesn't matter. I know we have good leaders here. But if you're present, then it won't even make a difference. But we focus on the wrong things. We want this type of leader and this. It's not that. We got to fill the masjid when there's a program. Ask yourself, will South Queens testify for me or against me on the Day of Judgment? We're not here by chance. We're here to spread the message of Islam. We're here to represent Islam in the best way. So ask yourself, what is this land, what is 133rd Street going to say about me on the Day of Judgment? What is it going to say about me? What are these trees that are bearing witness going to say? Also, don't be enticed by the comforts of this world. Chase the path of Allah and His Messenger. That was the mistake before. Building amazing palaces while people are starving. Remove your ego. This is the most important point here. If you want to really do Islamic work and make the community successful, get rid of your ego. The greatest problem is our nafs. We have to ask ourselves at any given point, what is the most pleasing thing to Allah? Not what is the most pleasing thing to me. What is going to please Allah the most right now? We have to work with an akhirah mentality. Why do we have so many ayat in the end of the last juz that we memorized? All talking about the akhirah, the hellfire, Jannah, reward, punishment, the mizan, the scales. We have to be thinking about the akhirah at all times. But this material world will, of course, make you do otherwise. Remember that your career doesn't define you, your Islam defines you. Oftentimes, we define ourselves by our career, by the size of our bank account. That's not what defines us. You are Muslim first and foremost. Also, if you want to be, again, contributing to the community, making sure it's strong, these words in quotes should never come out of your mouth. You should never utter a sentence that begins, the Muslims, or those Muslims, or that board, or those trustees, or that masjid, or those people. Those words do not exist in your vocabulary. Can you imagine the sin when you're provoking the community people to turn against one another? This cannot be part of our rhetoric at all. Otherwise, we're not building a community, we're building ta'ifa. We're building little fiefdoms. Remember, I started with that in the very beginning. There was, as soon as things crumbled, you had mini kingdoms, mini kingdoms. If the masjid becomes a mini kingdom, we're copying what was in Spain. And we haven't learned the lesson. The community also cannot boil down to a battle of wills. What that means is, it's not the person with the biggest voice or the one who's contributed the most to the masjid that has the strongest opinion. It's on principles. Who is adherent to the Quran, the Sunnah, and our tradition? That is what matters. It's not about who speaks the best. We just saw this trial with Rittenhouse. And that kid killed that man, and he got off. Why? Because the lawyers gave a better story. That's not the way things work in Islam. It's not about who can tell the better story, who has the better voice, who's the better speaker. It's about haqq. It's about standing for the Quran and the Sunnah, and again, our tradition. So it's not a battle of wills when it comes to meeting with each other and doing work for Islam. Also, when you bring people into your masjid, make sure you know them. Vet people before you give them positions in your masjid. And Abdurrahman III, not the right person for leadership. But because he was the son of the son of the son, make him the leader. He almost crippled the whole Muslim community. And then lastly, the house of Allah is your first house. Don't think when you come to the masjid, I've left my house and I've come here. Think I've come to my house. This is my house. The other place, that's just where I put my head down and sleep at night. But this is my house. So inshallah ta'ala, if we can remember some of these principles, we can build a stronger Muslim community. And we have to ask ourselves, what is my role in helping build and secure Masjid As-Siddiq? What is my role for the next 50 years, the next 100 years, the next 500 years? Don't just think next year. Okay, we got board elections, we got to find somebody to become the next. We got to think ahead. What happens when this whole region gets Islam, inshallah? Do you want this place to still be here so you get that sadaqah jariyah? Do you not believe that? That Islam will enter every single door? So what is your 50-year plan for Masjid As-Siddiq? What is your 100-year plan? What is your 500-year plan? We got to think ahead, inshallah, because we want to leave a legacy. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us guidance. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us tawfiq to not make the mistakes of the people before, but let's make new mistakes. Nothing wrong making new mistakes. Just don't make the same old ones over and over and over again. So inshallah ta'ala, we can leave a legacy for our children that they will be safe in this land and will not face any of the torment that we see anywhere around the world. Because don't think that the torment that happened in Spain, that's happening in China, that's happening in Kashmir, that's happening in Palestine. Don't think it can't come here if we let our guard down. You let our guard down, it'll come. And it's already coming through social media. Instead of our kids working to develop themselves, they're spending hours making TikTok videos. And much worse than that. So again, we ask Allah to grant us tawfiq. If I said anything offensive to anyone, I ask you to please forgive me. Jazakallah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.